Good morning, FCF. We had a long passage yesterday to deal with. A lot of information, a lot of background information. Today should be shorter. Now, Peter has warned about these false teachers, and he's started with a little bit of a description of them, some of their attributes. He's going to continue that as this passage goes on. But now he's just going to emphasize the fact that though it may look like they're getting away with what they're doing, because it says many people will follow their ways, they're going to be popular, they're going to be apparently looking successful on some level. Peter says, but don't think that God's letting this go. They are going to face a judgment. When you distort the character of God, you distort the truth about life, the things that God has sacrificially devoted himself to, when you're blocking the truth that brings real salvation, real healing to a human soul, God doesn't take that lightly. So now Peter, led by the Spirit, is just going to give us examples of how God doesn't judge immediately. He has timing, but that does not mean that judgment is not going to take place. So he's just going to give some examples of that. So I'm going to just read the last part of where we left off. So in 2 Peter chapter 2, I'm going to read you verse 3 once again. It says, "In their greed, these teachers will exploit you with their stories that they have made up. Their condemnation has long been hanging over them, and their destruction has not been sleeping." Now we're going to pick up. "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but sent them to hell," and that word for hell there, it's Greek word Tartarus. It's like the belief in the afterworld in biblical days. There was compartmentalized. You had a half that was paradise where the righteous went. You had a half that was called Tartarus, and sometimes Gehenna, and it was where the wicked went. He says, putting them into gloomy dungeons. So he's talking about angels now. So if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but sent them to hell, Tartarus, putting them into gloomy dungeons to be held for judgment. Notice the gloomy dungeons is not their judgment. They're just there, waiting for their judgment day. He's going to give another example. If he did not spare the ancient world when he brought the flood on its ungodly people, but protected Noah, a preacher of righteousness, and 7 others. He's going to give a third example. If he condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, you can read about that in Genesis 19, where he torched those 2 cities because of their rampant immorality, by burning them to ashes, and made them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly. And if he rescued Lot, a righteous man who was distressed by the filthy lives of the lawless men there, for this righteous man living among them day after day was tormented in his righteous soul by their lawless deeds that he saw and he heard. I think I read to you actually more verses than I want to there. I just want to stop at 4 and 5. So 4 and 5, he's speaking about angels, and he is speaking about Noah's generation. So the question becomes, what angels that sinned, that are kept in these gloomy dungeons waiting for judgment, what angels is he talking about, and why are those those angels associated with Noah? He goes right from the angels in gloomy dungeons to Noah and the judgment of the world in those days. Well, if you read Genesis chapter 6, you know that it says that the angels, that they decided they wanted to mate with human women, which was clearly forbidden by God. These angels that were obviously already in rebellion against God, they come down to earth, they take on human form, they mate with women, they reproduce. Genesis 6 tells very clearly that the beings that they reproduce are different than human. They're a hybrid. They're gigantic in proportion. They're called Nephilim. They multiplied like crazy all across the earth. We can find their monolithic structures on every continent in the world. And it was an attempt of the angels to destroy the human genome, to turn us into something other than what God had made us. It was an attempt to completely thwart God's plan for making image-bearing beings humans, by making us not human, by changing our DNA, turning us into some kind of hybrids. So those angels that did this, that first came down, some of them, God took them and imprisoned them, awaiting their judgment. Now, this is where it gets interesting. What it says in Genesis 6, it says that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and afterward, meaning after even the flooding. We find these offspring of these hybrids, angels and human hybrids, we find them in the land of Canaan. Hence the Israelites are told by God, go fight wars of extermination in the land of Canaan, root them out, don't leave any of them, because he was trying to stop the continual spreading of this hybrid genome, to the rest of the world. So somehow these angels came back on earth again. So it's an interesting question. After the flood depleted most of them, did some of them find ways to survive? Now, they are finding very, very interesting ancient monolithic structures, many of which are underneath of mountains where perhaps these beings went to survive the flood. It says that Noah had 120 years to build the ark, and so they probably knew this thing was coming and perhaps created structures so that some of the angels could survive. That's one way they could have been back on earth again. Another is that they could have just rebelled again after the flood, and some of them, risking it all, mated with women once again. We can't say specifically, but that's the association of those two things. Now, the main thought was just simply this. Peter saying these false teachers that look like they're winning, that they're gaining popularity, many people are following them, they're exploiting the people, they're making money off of them, they're baiting the people on the people's own greed. He says, don't think that they're going to get away from this. God may not judge them now, but God's pattern has been that he's going to see to it that exact justice is going to be meted out, but it may not be meted out in the time frame that we would like to see it. Okay, we'll stop there.